Hi folks, welcome to Real Talk. I'm Ron Strand. We're glad that you're joining us today. Today I've got a very special guest. Many of you know him. He's a prominent figure in the Jesus movement. His name's Oden Fong. Oden's got an incredible story from the time he grew up in Hollywood to the time he got heavily into drugs and has a miraculous story of salvation and has become an incredible musician and a pastor. It's a compelling story that you don't want to miss. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell. You'll be notified every time we have a new show. Thanks for watching. Oden, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited you're here because you hold the distinction for me of being one of the first Christian artists that I saw. And correct me if I'm wrong, because at this age I start getting those, was it that year that but 1976 is when I came to Christ. And a friend dragged me to I think it was a night of joy at Knott's Berry Farm.
Right.
And there, I think Mustard Seed Faith was playing there. And you can neither confirm nor deny that.
I think we were playing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, I think you were, because I remember that night I walked away because I bought 2 LPs. I bought Mustard Seed Faith, and I bought the first Daniel Amos album there that night. And so I went home and listened to these, and I thought, wow, great music. Because that was one of the things for me about coming to faith was, what about the music,
Right.
So it was a good introduction. So I want to go back, though, because you have a very, very interesting story. You come from a entertainment family background.
Yeah, acting family.
Acting family. Tell us a little bit about that.
My mom and dad were both motion picture actors,
Yeah.
and so I was raised in Hollywood, Laurel Canyon and Hollywood. I've lived on Hollywood Boulevard, right at the mouth of Laurel Canyon.
Right.
Growing up, my dad was. We were raised with our parents being known in the community, the acting community, and my dad had restaurants, and so his restaurants were filled with all the actors.
Yeah.
And so I grew up around the acting community of Hollywood.
So you got to know some of the old actors of the time.
The old ones, right.
Name a few of them that you knew.
Burt Lancaster, Fred Astaire.
Yeah.
There's so many of them.
Yeah, oh, sure.
I was raised with their kids. I grew up with the sons of Larry Parks, who played Al Jolson, and their godfather was Lloyd Bridges.
Oh, right.
So I was at Jeff Bridges' 8th birthday party.
Oh, were you
or
really?
Like that. Yeah, we all kind of integrated and things like that. But yeah, I was raised around June Allison. I'm trying to remember all the stars from that time.
Yeah.
It escapes me, but...
well, yeah, I mean, Lucille Ball and all those
I
people.
never met Lucille Ball, but pretty much everyone else.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
like my dad pretty much knew everyone.
Yeah.
His friends were actors and producers and directors. One of his best friends is the one that produced My 3 Sons and Family Affair, Edmund Hartman. And so we were always on the movie sets growing up and sitting. It was boring,
Was it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
Hanging out on the movie sets and things like that. My mom was an actress. They wanted to make her like the next May Wong.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because she was beautiful and had a lot of presence, but having 5 kids, she ended up leaving and kind of retiring. So she was in a couple of pretty big movies with Dick Powell, To the Ends of the Earth.
Yeah.
Singapore with Fred MacMurray, which was interesting because later Fred MacMurray did the My 3 Sons TV show, and my dad was a regular on that show.
Oh, he was?
He was a walk-on, not part of the main cast, but just on and off.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were raised watching our parents on TV and in movies and hanging out with all the people that were celebrities. But there were so many celebrities in Hollywood at the time, it was like, it wasn't unusual. We weren't all that special,
So you never got the acting bug, though?
I never wanted to be an actor.
Really?
I don't like cameras. I don't like looking at myself on camera. Two of my sisters became actresses, and they were in TV shows and did commercials.
Yeah.
But no, never wanted to be an actor. Never liked the idea of walking up and having to plant your mark. You know, come up to an X and then stop there. And but they tried to get me a little bit involved. I had parts written for me, and one part that was written for me on My Three Sons, they had written the part for me, and I just didn't want to do it because they didn't want to cut my hair. I was growing my hair.
Oh, is that right?
And I just didn't have an interest in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you'd mentioned your mom had 5 kids. So you have 4 siblings. There's 5.
Four sisters.
4 sisters.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
I'm the only son of a.
And where do you fall in there? Are you?
I'm second oldest.
Second oldest.
Right.
Wow. And so I know your story kind of progresses from there in terms of you ended up down in Laguna Beach.
Yes.
During the hippie era, what we
Yeah.
call now the pre-Jesus movement days.
Right.
Peace, love, free love, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was a teenager in the counterculture revolution days. So I started participating in that movement when I was in Hollywood.
Oh, did you?
So when I was right out of high school, I was just already starting to take LSD.
Wow.
And then I started to go to the Love-Ins in Elysian Park and Griffith Park and listen to the bands and experiment a lot. And ended up eventually moving to Laguna Beach, actually because I was starting to get in too much trouble in Hollywood.
Were you?
So I moved down to Hollywood, and from Hollywood to Laguna Beach, and moved into a hotel on Crest Street Beach. It was a hotel there, and it was kind of like if you ever see the Beatles movie where they're going in and out of rooms and things like that, it was kind of like that.
It was kind of like that.
And I was playing my guitar down on the beach one day, and a guy came up and started playing flute. He liked the way I played, and so he invited me out to the canyon. And we all knew in Laguna that the people that lived in the canyon were the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. And they were like the high priests of LSD, and they were the main source of LSD, probably in the United States at that time. And so I ended up meeting him, and then he invited me to come out and play. Then I ended up moving in with them, and I got involved in a family whose main quest was to change the world through the use of LSD by making it really not only affordable, but we ended up giving hundreds of thousands of doses away all the time, throwing them out to audiences at the concerts.
Wow.
Trying to get people elevated, because the world at the time seemed to be entrapped in a path that was leading to complete destruction. So we had the civil rights movement going on back then. I was in Hollywood during the Watts riots and watched the city burn. There was upheaval inside the school systems. I knew people inside the SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. There were women's rights. Everything was going on at that time, the Vietnam War especially.
Right.
And so I think we thought if we could get everyone to take acid, because when we had taken it, we became different people. There was a transformation that happened within everyone, no matter what background they were from. And so in this group of people that I knew, a lot of them came from very, very wealthy backgrounds, and other people came from poverty.
Right.
And we all seemed to be the same, brought to the same level when we would take LSD. So it was perhaps like a vision to change the world, bring in the Aquarian age and of peace on the earth, and we propagated it through trying to introduce LSD into the lives of people all over the world.
That's really interesting, because you talk about the time and the culture that we were in, and it was a time of upheaval.
Yes.
And you're living at home with your parents that are movie actors. And before the interview today, you and I were talking a little bit about, and you said you're kind of an introvert as a young man. So, what was it for you? Was it the upheaval of the time, or was it just, what was it that attracted you? And I don't want to glorify drugs here, but what was it that attracted you to becoming, getting into the drug culture?
I think that Well, early on, because I always played music, I think that there were people smoking pot already that were playing music, and I frequented all the Hollywood places where music was being played, the Ash Grove and the Troubadour and all those places. I think I started to experiment with pot first, and that was no great revelation. It was just fun. And then my girlfriend at the time introduced me to LSD, and I was never a religious person. I didn't believe in God. I didn't even think about God. When I took LSD, I almost instantly had a sense of everything being connected and there being like a divine intelligence or a divine architect for the universe. Because I used to take LSD and not party and play around, but because I was an introvert, I would go up on a hill and lay on my back up in Griffith Park or up in the Hollywood Hills or anywhere and look at the stars and look at the trees, and things would be melting together. And but there was a revelation of some sort of a intelligence. And so that's what probably drew me more, and I wanted to get deeper into it. And when I moved to Laguna, I ran into a lot of people that had the very same types of ambitions to know God and to discover God and to know who God is. And although we had the wrong idea, we were down the wrong path, we all were God seekers. And it didn't matter if you were a Buddhist or a Christian or anything else. Whatever belief system there was, they all kind of merged into one. We're all one family, we're all one brotherhood, and things like that.
And that seems to be a echoing chorus in terms of a lot of the folks that kind of came out of the Jesus movement. I know the guys we were talking earlier about in Love Song, same thing, they were doing LSD, and it opens up a spiritual element, doesn't it? Because, I mean, as we know what drugs really are, it's something that, pharmacia, or what do they call it? But it's something that really opens your mind and actually your spirit to.
It seemed to be a catalyst to, I think the way that I perceived it was when I would take LSD, my conscious mind and my subconscious mind would almost merge. And you would see things in a completely different light. Then you had to decide whether or not it was real or not. And so part of the discipline was to know what was real, what wasn't real, and to find what was real and pursue that in the usage. So you did this for a number of years in the... not that many years, probably just a few years of serious study. But we didn't only take LSD, we took all the other psychedelics as well. We eat peyote and take psilocybin, magic mushrooms, anything that we felt would open up our consciousness and get us closer to God.
So you had quite an experience, I think, at one point, if I'm not mistaken.
I did. That experience that you're referring to was my conversion. And what happened was I was sick and tired of just seeing glimpses of what I thought was the reality of God. It seemed like I would come so close, and I would feel almost like a presence of God, but I couldn't maintain it. And I was one of the people in our group of friends that would take higher and higher doses. It wasn't abnormal for me to take 10 or 15 doses of LSD at a time. And I decided I wanted to know once and for all how to get across that threshold and really know God. And so our group of friends had developed a product, or an LSD, that was supposed to be the most powerful acid in the world, and it was called Sunshine LSD. And before it went to the tabbing machines, I mean, in the beginning there were no machines. They used to just like drill little holes, piece of wood, and fill it up and make tabs. But I decided to take a super high dose out in the high desert in Joshua Tree, where I used to go out normally for what we called like a sacrament, where you go out and sit on a rock and on a blanket all night and take LSD and look at the stars and become one with the universe.
Yeah.
So I went out to the high desert to a place called Live Oak Tank with two friends, and I had a vial of just the crystal form or the powder form of our product before it was colored and put into tabby machines. It was about 150 doses.
Wow.
And I just swallowed the whole thing, and it started to, come on to the drug. And usually when you're coming onto a drug and it's that powerful, you center yourself, you chant, you whatever you have to do in order to not just blow your mind. And for some reason I had a really bad reaction. I couldn't breathe. And then one of my friends said that I didn't have a pulse.
Wow.
And but to me, it all happened. I mean, in a really all that happened in a really short time. But to me, it seemed like it lasted an eternity. And I remember, going into darkness, and that's what I remember, going into a darkness. And as I was going into the darkness, we were always trained, even in other religions, that what you do when you come to that place is to look for the light, or look for the golden cord, or look for. So that you can come back and be reincarnated into another body. And so I'm looking, I don't perceive anything, I don't see anything, and then there's no light, it's just darkness. And the only way I can describe it is if you were in a completely dark room with no light in it whatsoever, where you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face, but add to that the fact that you no longer have feelings, physical feelings, you can't feel anything, you can't touch anything, you no longer have a body, you're just like a living, conscious entity in an eternal darkness.
Wow.
And that's the closest I can come to describing that. And I remember in my psyche, in my mind, because I didn't have a mouth, I couldn't speak, I had nothing to, at my disposal.
Yeah.
I remember just crying out in my mind, chanting the chants that I used, and the crying out to the different names of the gods and the avatars. And the very last name that I cried out was Jesus. And he was probably my least favorite of the manifestations of God, just because I felt like the followers that I had met, the Christians that I had met, were narrow-minded and judgmental, and I still think that in a lot of ways. They just weren't what I reflected as being something that would be euphoric or godly or elevated.
Yeah.
But I cried out to Jesus, and all of a sudden, everything inside this dark universe that I was in began to kind of, the only way I could describe it is it began to quake and shake, and it got more and more intense and more and more intense, and I was so afraid, but I couldn't do anything or go anywhere. And I started to see, even though I no longer was in a conscious body, I started to see flashes of light inside the darkness, just flashes. And it got brighter and brighter, and then I woke up in my body. I was laying on my back. I was looking up at the sky. It was about noon because the sun was shining overhead. And there was a man, the figure of a man standing over me, not too far away, just within feet. But I couldn't make out any image or any detail because there was so much light coming from this shape. I mean, the light was so bright that it was brighter than the sun that was shining above this person. And I immediately just freaked out. I spun around and I tried to bury my head into the sand of the desert.
Wow.
Push my head into the sand, to crawl under the dirt. And I don't know why I did that. It wasn't like I was afraid that I'd be hurt or harmed.
So there was a change somewhere along the way that you had with the drugs that was
Yes.
pretty life-changing. Talk about that.
I had always been a God seeker, and I sought God primarily through LSD, although I did meditation, I practiced yoga, I was a vegetarian, I did all that. But LSD was probably my favorite way of coming as close as I could to God. But I found that I couldn't get close enough with the doses or the amount of LSD I was taking, so I decided at one point to do a super high dose, which was really unheard of even for me. Now, I had taken previous to that like 100 doses of somebody else's LSD.
That's incredible.
But we knew that everybody else's acid was not as strong as ours. So I went out to the high desert in Joshua Tree out to a place called Live Oak Tank, which is one of the paths that go way into the desert, so that I wouldn't be disturbed, with two friends. And I took a vial of our product, which was Sunshine LSD before it's tabbed, and just took the whole thing down and waited to kind of come on and take me through this experience. And what happened was, as I started to come on, and I you start to center yourself and chant and make sure that you don't lose your mind and spiral off into the Zen zone. What happened is I found that I couldn't breathe, and then as I started to suffocate, one of my friends told me that when they found me, they couldn't find a pulse.
So you were really ODing.
I was ODing, and I don't know what caused that, because I never believed that there was an overdose for LSD, at least physically.
Yeah.
But something happened, something short-circuited, and I actually, for however long it was, died. And in that experience, as I remember it, it was just total blackness. It was total darkness. I no longer had a body, so I couldn't see, I couldn't hear, I couldn't feel. I was just a conscious, living, existing entity or spirit without a body. But I was in a place that was just complete darkness. But I had learned in my studies that other people had that experience, and then they would look for the light, seemed like the end of a tunnel or the silver cord or golden cord. And if they found that, they would just be reincarnated into their next life. And so I struggled to find that and didn't see any light. There was nothing at all but darkness. And one thing I just remembered right now is that I could sense the presence of other souls like me. I couldn't contact them, I couldn't speak to them, I couldn't communicate with them, but they were there, and there was a great feeling of dread and fear and trepidation. And I remember crying out to all the different gods that I had studied under, or the avatars, and what we considered to be manifestations of the one God, and nothing was happening, nothing was working. And the last name I cried out to, even though I didn't do it with a voice, was Jesus. And I had bad experiences with Christians. My experience with Christians began with the Children of God and Tony and Susan Alamo in Hollywood, because those were the only two Christian groups that were in Hollywood. And I used to spend a lot of time on Hollywood Boulevard, Sunset Boulevard, and they'd always be around. And one group were very condemnative, and the other were extreme grace, and that was the Children of God, and God will forgive you of anything, and just jump on our bus and we'll take you to our ranch or whatever. And Tony and Susan Alamo were always trying to get you to go with them also. And so I didn't trust Christians, I didn't like Christians, I didn't like their dogma and their narrow-mindedness and their what I considered to be self-righteousness, judgment and things. But I still cried out the name of Jesus. And when I did, it was like things in that void or that darkness began to shake or quake or move, or it was almost like the whole universe was being shaken. Like if you could put the whole universe in a jar and someone was shaking it, it felt like that. And then I started to see flashes of light. Even though I didn't have eyes, I could still perceive there was something happening and something coming. And I still didn't think it was someone. It was just something happening. And it was very scary. And I woke up and I was back conscious in my body, and I was looking up, and I knew it was around noon because the sun was shining above me, but next to the where I was looking at the sun was the image of a man, and the reason why I say image is because I couldn't make out any distinct detail at all. I couldn't see clothing, a body, or eyes, or anything. It was just an outline with all this light pouring through the outline. And I remember I spun around, and I was terrified, and I tried to get away from this person or this whatever I was seeing, and I actually tried to force my head into the sand of the desert to get away. But something that was really interesting is that even when I had my eyes closed and I had my head in the sand, it's almost like I could still see the image.
Really?
And then I heard a voice, as I remember it, that said, "I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end." And I remember even today what it sounded like, what the voice sounded like, because it filled every particle of air. It's like there was no other sound but that voice. It consumed everything, but yet it wasn't loud. It was just everywhere, and it was everything. And when I turned around, I finally had the courage to turn around. There was no one there, but there were still flashes of light inside the daylight, right in the air, just brighter flashes than the sun could illuminate.
Wow.
And so I left there, and we drove home. My friends were relieved because they were looking for a ranger to tell them that I was deceased.
Yeah.
I was dead.
Wow.
And we all rejoiced, and I went back to Laguna. I snorted a bunch of coke because by that time we were starting to, and that was taboo for us because we believed that was bad karma. But we got into cocaine, and I snorted some cocaine, which made me, feel a little bit normal.
So you hear this
Voice.
presence, this voice that says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega."
Right.
Had you known that scriptural reference?
I had heard that before, so that was something I thought of later. Did I just conjure this? Was this just like some sort of a conjured hallucination that I had, and I had heard Alpha and Omega as relating to Jesus, and then I just kind of made it up? And so I was willing to believe that. And I started the coke, and I basically dismissed the whole adventure.
Wow.
I said, "Oh, that wasn't real. It was just a
Really?
It was just a trip."
Wow.
But in the following days and weeks, I had complete strangers walk up to me and say, "God told me to tell you that what you experienced was real."
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they were blowing my mind. And that happened for a long time. And then I decided still to disbelieve. And I was in my backyard jamming with some friends, playing music, and someone had made a big sunshine LSD lollipop about this big, and it was all orange. It was the same coloring and everything, with a happy face on it, and everyone was taking a lick. And by this time I had become kind of cranky and just really hard to live with, and I didn't know why, except for the fact that I think that I finally thought that I had done the last thing to find out who God was, and I was greatly disappointed. And so when the lollipop hit my hand, I stopped playing, and I took a bite off of it, and I probably ate half the lollipop.
Wow.
I started coming on, walked over and sat down on this van seat that came out of a maxi van that was outside my house, and this young guy who loved Jimi Hendrix, dressed like Jimi Hendrix, played like Jimi Hendrix, came up to me, and he sat down next to me. And his father was a believer. His father was like a Christian. He wasn't a Christian. And he said to me, "My boy, you look like you just took a bite out of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil."
Wow.
And he said that to me, and I looked around, I looked at all my friends that I had been living with all that time, and I thought, we're going the wrong way. We're headed the wrong way. And I freaked out. I lived right up against the side of the mountain, and I ran up the mountain, and all my friends thought I was going to hurt myself, so they came up to try to help me, and And I was also a martial artist, so I was kicking them off the mountain, hurting them, and just total freak out. And I ran. They didn't want to get hurt, so they left me alone. I ran out into the street, ran up in front of the Hare Krishna temple that we helped them.
This is down in Laguna.
Yeah, it was the first Hare Krishna temple in the canyon when they first moved into the city, and I knew them because I went there and worshipped with them, and even though I was never a devotee, and I went down and I was sitting in front of the temple on a manhole cover or something, and I was just lost. And one of the devotees, a young lady, came out, and she said, see this, this is you. And she showed me a picture of Jesus.
Okay.
This is you. And I said, no, that's not me. And I saw the difference between being God or being an incarnation of God and the fact that Jesus was real. And I knew that he was real. And I think I was fighting that reality that he was real. And so I said no, and from that day on, I still had people coming up to me all the time, telling me, giving me these words, saying that God is trying to reach me, he's trying to communicate with you. And so another friend of mine that lived in the canyon at the time had become a Christian previous to that. And he was like a guy when I first met. He was in the gutter, and he was kind of a wino. He was always drinking, and but also taking LSD. And he was in a band called Salvation, but they weren't a Christian band. Most of them were meth addicts.
Yeah.
And he played the flute, and he also played piano. And he'd always play in a neighbor's house this old out-of-tune piano all the time, beautiful, flowing piano parts. And he had become a Christian, and he was coming around during that time too, but he didn't talk back in those days. Couldn't get a word out of him. He would just nod. Are you hungry? He'd nod. You want to eat? He would nod, but never said a word. Completely quiet. And he started to talk. And he was going to a church, and they kept inviting me to come out to the church, and I wouldn't come. And finally, I ended up going to the church with them. But I had already believed in Christ. I believed in Christ, but I didn't want to join anything. I was suspicious of any type of organization, but I ended up going with them, and that was Calvary Chapel. And it was just this little building in the middle of a bean field. And when I went there, it was packed with hippies. It was packed with people with long hair, and they were excited, and there was joy, and they were hugging each other and then introducing themselves to one another. So I knew that they didn't know each other, and I was going, this is it. I go, this is real, And I got to, from that time on, the main guy, his name is Lonnie Frisbee. I came to know him and invited him down to into the canyon because I had already started to do potlucks down there, and a lot of people were showing up, and a lot of my old friends tried to become Christians. We were leading the people in this canyon to Christ, and yet it was the heart of the LSD movement in the city. Right. So all my old friends were really angry at me, and one night they threw a bunch of LSD into our salad, and someone started coming onto it. But we were so naive that we thought we don't need to throw the salad out. We just need to pray over it, and we did, and no one else got high. No one else got high.
Wow.
But Lonnie would come out and preach in the backyard, and some of the Hare Krishna people were getting saved, and people were getting saved. Debbie Kerner, Rotino would come out with Lonnie, and she would sing, and we had all kinds of different people coming out. I wasn't really connected to Calvary at that time completely, but we were going everywhere in those days. There was no school at Calvary, so we would go to Melodyland and go to take classes there. To exercise the gifts of the Spirit, we'd go down to Dana Point to this guy named Jerry Fromling. Brett Baker started having healing services up in Long Beach, so all of us would go up there and we'd participate in that. And Greg Laurie was part of that too. Greg was up there, and Kathy's sister, and Kathy's sister was married to one of the elders of that church. And so we just started running. And back in those days, all we wanted to do was share the gospel. So we were always preaching the gospel all the time. I wasn't involved in the music at the time. I was just into the Lord and studying the Bible, and I had a little Bible with a white Bible with a zipper on it, a girl's Bible, and that was my Bible. And I would have that with me all the time. But eventually I was invited to play in a little trio where they had lost a member, so there were two guys, and one of them was my friend Pedro. He played flute, and there was a guitar player that played, and they said, well, will you come and play with us? And I said, I'll do it for a while, but I'm not guaranteeing I'm going to stay. And so I started playing with them. It was just this little trio called Mustard Seed. It wasn't Mustard Seed Faith, it was just Mustard Seed, and we would just go anywhere where we could to preach the gospel on the streets. There was no way we could get into the churches because they didn't accept us back in those days. So we played in juvenile halls. We played in schools, grammar schools, junior high schools. For some reason, they were open to us playing.
Right.
And so our whole bent was on evangelism.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of entered into the music ministry, was by joining that band.
So that band, Pedro Buford, was Louis McVeigh part of Mustard Seed? Or
he wasn't yet.
Not yet.
That's another whole funny story. We didn't have, as we were going out as a trio, I introduced like electric instruments to the band. We were like an acoustic band before that. And one of the members left, and then there were only two of us. And Pedro and I traveled around as a duo for a long time in my Volkswagen convertible, even in the dead of winter, and the windows wouldn't roll up. So like sometimes I remember one time we were up in Big Bear and it was snowing and things like that, and we had to take our clothes, including our underwear, and put it on our heads, keep our heads warm and things like that. But then we decided that we needed a real bass player, and so there was a band called Selah, and there was a young man by the name of John Bellis, and he was in Selah. Selah broke up. I was with Eric Nelson and Joy Strange, who later played with Parable. Yeah. And then there were three of us: a bass player, guitar player, and Pedro playing piano and playing flute. And then right before we finally got to do our first record, John left and quit. So Jay Truax from Love Song did all the bass on our first record. So we didn't even really have a full band at the time, but we did pick up a drummer. We were auditioning for drummers, and Rick Thompson, who later was in Sweet Comfort, he auditioned and we hired him. We didn't hire him, but we said, yeah, you can be part of the band. And then I met Louis in the tent, back in the Calvary Chapel tent. He was dating a friend of mine, and he was in a lot of trouble. He had gotten busted for sales of hashish or something like that on the campus of what is now Vanguard University.
Oh my gosh, wow. And
back then it was SEC. Yeah. But I liked him and I resonated with him, and I took him to my house in Laguna to audition him on my drum set, which didn't even have a real cymbal stand. It was like a projector stand. Put it up there, and he played, and he was a crack drummer, didn't overplay. And so I had to tell Rick, I go, Rick, we're not going to use you because we found Louis. And Rick was, he was hurt by it. But then he and his brother and Brian Duncan started Sweet Comfort Band.
Right.
And then they became a band. And then we did our first record after that. So it was almost like right after that. But Louis turned out to be a guitar player and a singer, and he did some of the songs on that first album, and the rest was kind of...
That's the eponymous, is it the word, record cover
Right.
with the ship on it,
Right.
Sail on Sailor.
Right.
Yeah.
Originally, the album was going to be called Lighter Side of Darkness, but Chuck didn't like the title.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So at that time, the Beach Boys had just come out with Sail on Sailor.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Lewis wrote Sail on Sailor to kind of answer them.
Yeah.
So we took the Sail on Sailor name, and then after that is when we there was a band called The Brethren, led by Wayne Taylor, Pastor Wayne Taylor,
Yeah.
and his bass player Daryl Cook.
Yeah.
We met him, and then he became part of the band, and then we just kept touring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you guys toured for how long? I mean,
Not super long with the band. We probably broke up in 1977 or 1978,
Yeah.
around then.
but some incredible music came out of that. I mean, as I said, one of the first bands I heard was Mustard Seed Faith, and you've got that velvet voice and some of the Lighter Side of Darkness and all those other.
I cringe listening to myself.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do. I can't listen to it. I can't listen to myself.
Well, I think everybody's like that.
Yeah, I've never considered myself a real vocalist. I was more of a message writer.
Yeah.
I always saw myself as being a songwriter, a message writer, not really a vocalist. I mean, vocalists to me are like Matthew Ward and Chuck Butler and Daryl Mansfield. Those are singers.
Well, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. So you got to know Chuck Smith very well, and the Smith family, obviously,
Yes.
and you worked under Chuck for many years.
Yeah, I began just as friends because no one knew who I was when I was at Calvary. And one night, I had been at Calvary for almost a whole year, and then at winter camp, I asked if I could sing a song, and I borrowed a guitar from one of the Pete Jacobs from Children of the Day.
Yeah.
It was 12-string, and I sang a song that I'd written. And from then on, the door was open for me to play.
Yeah.
But and this is before I joined Mustard Seed.
Right. Okay, so you borrowed Pete Jacobson's.
Yeah, I played a song, and then Kay especially liked me. But early on, I started to travel with Chuck and Kay because Chuck loved my testimony.
Yeah.
And he would take me with him to give my testimony, and then he would speak.
Yeah.
And so we would travel around, especially in the early days when the Calvaries started to be developed. I mean, Calvary's outside of Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa. We would go all around and visit the churches that were opening up.
Yeah.
So I traveled a lot with Chuck, but we were mostly on the road. We did not participate a lot in the church. We were always on the road.
Yeah.
We were always playing. Pedro said that we would log 60,000 miles a year, sometimes on the road, mostly driving.
Is that right?
Yeah, mostly driving. Crisscrossing the country, back and forth, up and down to British Columbia and back. And we established the first circuits for Maranatha, but they would use us as like the pioneers or the first people out.
Yeah.
Our band and Parable.
Yeah.
A lot of times it was Parable and us, and we would see if the thing was going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So we toured a lot.
All the stuff you're talking about is you came right out of the Jesus movement, and which is the story behind the current movie that's out right now.
Yes.
Called Jesus Revolution. And we know that it's a drama based on a reality. But you saw the movie, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Give me your take on it. I know you don't have to, but no, just give me your take.
I think
on it.
I think it was inspirational. I thought it was beautiful. I think it will, and it has touched a lot of lives and led a lot of people that had walked away from the Lord back and kind of re-energized some revival to a certain extent. As far as I knew this would happen too when I finally saw the movie, because I didn't see it until it was streamed.
Yeah.
I didn't see it in the theater. The characters are what probably stumbled me a little bit because I knew all of the characters really well. I knew Chuck Smith very well.
Yeah.
And Greg very well. I spent a lot of time with Greg and Kathy. Kathy and Greg were really close friends, as was Kathy's sister and Jan Smith.
Right.
I mean, I know all the characters really well, and that was probably the only thing that I had difficulty with is that the characters didn't match up.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Greg was not that emotional.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time with Greg everywhere, and I've never seen him, weep and cry or show that type of emotion. Kathy was never that wild. She's always been a very classy, ladylike, down-to-earth woman. Jan was like Snow White, who played Jan Smith.
Yeah.
Jan was always like her dad, very solid, logical thinking type of woman. And Lonnie, in particular, I've spent a lot of time with Lonnie. He just was not that. First of all, he was not that huggy.
Yeah.
He was more reserved. Mm-hmm. He was more laid back.
Yeah.
He wasn't goofy at all. He was really smart, very intelligent man. And even though he had a lot of confidence because he was kind of the center of what was going on in our part of the movement, he never struck me as being egotistical.
Yeah.
He didn't talk about himself a lot.
Right.
He was primarily interested in seeing people become Christians.
Yeah.
He was an evangelist, and a strong evangelist, and a bold, very bold young man.
Indeed.
So, it was a little, and then to see Love Song on that film, that was very disturbing.
Yes, it was very disturbing.
Just because that was almost like a ragtag group of people, and Love Song were precision, professional people that became Christians.
Yeah.
I mean, all of them were excellent musicians.
Yeah.
And wonderful guys, just wonderfully devoted to the Lord guys, every one of them in that band.
So you started Poema Fellowship in Huntington Beach. When did you start that?
The first Poema was in 1995. I left staff at Calvary Costa Mesa. I was on pastoral staff there for 10 years and taught there for 11 years. I taught one of the main studies. And Greg Laurie was teaching at the same time.
Yeah.
He did Monday nights, I did Tuesday nights.
Right.
David Hawking Wednesday nights, Chuck Thursday nights.
Yeah, there was something going on every night.
Yeah, David Manny did the movies on Fridays and was an evangelist.
Yeah.
So I left staff when I felt like I could no longer do what I was trying to do, and I needed more freedom and leeway. And so I planted the first Poema in Huntington Beach in 1995. And then left in 2000 and moved up to Hollywood, tried to start a church up there.
Oh, you did?
Along with some people from Calvary Chapel of Downey, with Jeff Johnson's blessing. And that failed, and so then I came back. But we've always been Poema.
Yeah. And you've got a wonderful group of a lot of original members of Calvary Chapel that come to your church now.
Yeah. Because of the fact that, we went through a lot of toil. We were in Huntington, and another church wanted our location, and we said no, and then they went to the city and had us they outbid us and had us kicked out. And so we ended up coming to Costa Mesa to an open door that was there. And at that particular time, a lot of the early Calvary people were leaving the Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa because Costa Mesa was trying to revitalize the church and bring in more young people. Yeah. So they're catering more to the young, and the old people felt like they didn't fit any longer, and so the elderly left, and now a lot of them come to our church.
Where can folks find, do you have a website?
We do on and off.
Do you? On and off?
Yeah, because we've never had much. We've never been interested in advertising. So our website was just something that we put up at one point and didn't maintain it very well. And we're in the process of getting it back up again, but it's not our main goal.
Yeah, gotcha.
And we, the group of people that we have, they're elderly, and so people that do come to visit, a lot of times they go, "Oh, this is an old people's church," but it's what we are called to do right now, and so we love it, and we love the people, and we're going to take care of them until they all pass over. And once they all pass over, then we'll do something different.
Exactly. Well, that's the way to live, right?
I know.
You know, one of the things I like to do, Oden, with all my guests is to kind of get their perspective and where the church is today.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, we were talking about earlier about certain churches going woke, and what's your take on the church today?
I think it's varied from what I see. I think that some churches that are leaning toward being kind of woke are just trying to, I always give everyone the benefit of the doubt and believe the best. So if people are Christians and they love the Lord and they know God through the Spirit, then I have a hands-off attitude, even if it's something I disagree with. And so if the churches are trying to relate to the culture and that happens to be woke, or if they happen to support Black Lives Matter, or they're very gracious with the the gay movement and transgender movement and everything like that, I don't judge anyone. The way I feel is that God can do anything, and the church is oftentimes, like Dave Rolfe, my friend, says, it's very messy. It's a messy family, and we have to kind of find our way. And so the state of the church now that I see it, it's trying to find itself again. I do see there are a lot of people that don't believe that Catholics are saved. I disagree with that strongly, because I know a lot of Catholic people, including clergy, priests, that love the Lord.
Absolutely.
And although I disagree strongly with some of the practices of both the Catholic Church and some denominations, I still look at them as brothers and sisters.
Right.
And we were talking earlier about some of our friends that were in churches that went wayward and went crazy. I still look at them as brothers and sisters that I pray for, and I pray that God gives them wisdom and direction. And so right now I think the church is in a state where it's trying to find itself again, because there's upheaval in the church. There's strong disagreements in doctrine and eschatology in particular, as far as should we be dispensationalists, should we believe in should we be preterists, should we, whatever people to happen to believe. I think somewhere along the line we have to just settle into being the body of Christ and understand that the world needs to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. We can't get it done if we're fighting. And so I think, I'm not ecumenical. I don't think that we should all hold hands and say, we are the world, type of thing. But I think that we should give each other grace and latitude in following the Lord. And if people are wrong, then the Lord will straighten them out if they're the Lord's people.
What would you say to folks watching today that may not have a faith or may have faltered from their faith?
First thing I would say is the same thing that someone said to me is, hey, you've tried LSD, you've taken drugs, you've gone out on a limb and even dangerously explored things to find out if they're true or not. I always just say, hey, if you want to know if Jesus Christ is real, ask him. And even if you feel stupid by praying to someone that you don't believe in, that's all I did to really meet the Lord. I had, even previous to my experience with that death experience in the desert, I was praying and saying, hey, Jesus, if you're real, show me. If you're real, then you will show me. And that's all I did, and he did. So I believe that he would do that with anyone who asks of him, even if it's with the least amount of faith. So there's times where we say to God, I want to believe, I believe, but help my unbelief. And then God bridges the gap between your unbelief and belief. And I think that anyone who hears God's calling and gives it any type of attention at all will come to find that he's real.
Amen to that. And folks, one of the things that was so interesting, Oden, that you were talking about is when Oden was in that situation and out in the desert, he called on all the names of different gods, different avatars and so forth. But it was one name that he called out to where the light shone. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but through me. There's no other way. You tried all the other ways.
I
The
did,
dead
or
ends.
as many as I could.
Right. And so Jesus is the
He's the gate to the sheepfold.
Gate to the sheepfold.
Right.
And so cry out to Jesus. And folks, if you have, and if you're watching this and you do that, reach out to us at the Upper Room Presents, prayer@theupperroompresents.com. We'd love to hear from it and send you some material. Oden, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a long time that I wanted to do this with you, and
All right.
we finally got it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to see you next month,
Yes.
depending on when you watch this. But July 2023, you're going to be at the Upper Room, opening for Matthew Ward and his
Yes.
band, and so we're looking
forward to it.
Yeah.
I love Matthew.
Yeah,
I just love him as a person, and I adore his music as well.
yeah, indeed, indeed. Well, you are a treasure to
Thank
the
you.
body of Christ, and thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
All right.
And folks, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care.